Today, I'm going to be talking about emotional patience. And this is because one of the biggest roadblocks we have to emotional well being in ourselves and in our kids is how we respond to emotions once they show up. Much of the time, we consider that the actual emotion itself, that painful emotion, is the problem, rather than maybe spend enough time on thinking of its causes and consequences. And indeed, when we have this sort of lens, the source of our suffering starts to expand beyond the emotion itself. It really isn't that momentary emotion that always passes that causes the suffering. It's what we do with those emotions. Do we fend them off, avoid them, suppress them, feel shame? Do we try to contort ourselves and our lives so that we never feel them in the first place? These are the things that actually compromise our mental health, not the emotion itself. And this is where emotional patience comes in. It's the patience, really, to think of and approach our difficult, painful emotions, as well as challenges in our lives, as opportunities, even when we wish they haven't happened. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we welcome in these painful emotions to our lives, but when we think of them as opportunities, our frame changes and everything we do afterward changes. Because believing that emotions deserve our patience, our engagement, that they're worth having, it sets us up for success, for seeing the information in emotions, for increasing our flexibility and our ability to cope when we actually accept them as potentially useful parts of being human. So I'm going to talk today with you about a couple ways that we can really cultivate and build and practice that emotional patience that allows us to take this more helpful stance towards emotions, particularly in the context of anxiety. So now, before I jump into those, and sorry, that took me a few minutes to find the arrow, but before I jump into these two exercises that I hope we can try together, and if you have a piece of paper nearby, that will be good in just a moment. I just want to remind you about one of the best breathing techniques to help us cultivate emotional patience. Those of you who've come to office hours before know this. I'll just quickly describe it and can send other information as well if you wish. This is called the 4-7-8 breathing technique. It actually biologically slows down our nervous system, and it allows our brain and body to talk to each other so that we can discover that even when we feel like we're in that fight flight mode, our mind and body can connect, and we can learn that, that anxious feeling, that worry, it's not a danger signal. I'm not in trouble. I can actually take a breath and pause and actually take a moment to figure out how I want to respond to this emotional experience. So this 4-7-8 breathing technique, by bringing us down to a baseline, we don't have to be so reactive to our emotions. We can get more proactive. And it's simply the technique of breathing in for a count of 4 through your nose, holding your breath for 7, and then breathing out through your mouth like you're blowing out a candle for 8. So in with your nose, hold for 7, for 8. And just repeating this 4 times total can have an immediate and beneficial effect on your biology, so you feel calmer and ready to cultivate emotional patience. So here's the first exercise that I'd love to try with you about cultivating emotional patience. I call it future tense thinking because it's helpful for a lot of emotions. It's particularly helpful for anxiety because it allows us to find the call to action in our experience of anxiety that helps us figure out what to do next that is most helpful. So the first step in this exercise is to identify the source of your anxiety or distress. Now, if you're in the middle of something and you're feeling really anxious about it, this probably won't be hard. But if you can just take a moment now and think about something that had caused you anxiety or distress in the recent past, just take a moment to see if something pops into mind. Maybe it's just holiday planning and all the also joyful, but also, kind of negative anxiety provoking kinds of anxieties there as well. But, just take a moment to pick something. Okay, so once you have that, I want you to take a few minutes either writing down or imagining what is the worst outcome possible in this regarding this thing that you're concerned about, worried about, distressed about? So if your child is, for example, in the middle of finals like mine is, and I'm starting to feel anxious on his behalf, I could, let me just articulate for myself, well, what is the worst thing that could happen? And I can write that out in detail. Don't be too vague. Try to go into some detail. And I'm going to give you about, 30 to 60 seconds to try that. Okay, so you may notice a few things, by the way. You may notice that you'll be listing some things that you immediately realize aren't really realistic. And that's helpful all in and of itself. But there may be things that were just sort of sitting under the surface that you have now given voice to, given words to, so you can better understand what it is that's making you worried or anxious. Okay, so then after you have that down, the next step is to, in the same way, write down or think out, think through the best possible outcome. Right. So if this is the worst thing that can happen, what is the best thing that can happen? What do I wish for? What am I hoping for? And I'm again going to give you about 30 to 60 seconds to write out a detailed description of that. Okay, so let's pause there. So now that you have that articulated, you've tuned in to what you don't want and what you want, because anxiety orients us to both the bad and the good outcomes. That's why we're not just giving up or despairing. Anxiety means that we still have a best possible outcome in mind. So you've tuned into that now. And you may discover that the worst isn't as bad as it seemed, or maybe it is, but you've also started to understand what you want to work towards. So now the step 2 is to think through concretely what action you can take to get closer to the outcome you want, maybe also preventing the outcome you don't want. And here we want to think in terms of right now as well as later. So take a moment to maybe jot down a few ideas. It also helps you think realistically, what can I do right now about the situation and what needs to wait? As you're thinking about that, you are going to come to terms with the fact that some things are in your control and some aren't. The good news about this is that there's actually, when we think about it, sometimes more things in our control than we think. So take a little bit of time now. I'll give you another 30 seconds to think about concretely actions you can take now and or later, and what really is in your control. What is it? Okay, hopefully, I know we're moving a little fast, but hopefully you had time to write down a few things. Now, the power of the second step is that you're really reminding yourself that you're preparing, that this uncomfortable feeling is actually helping you prepare. It's forcing you on, to look at, it's making you uncomfortable forcing you to sit up and pay attention. And now really think about preparing for what actions you need to take to make things turn out okay, to make your life better. And that's why this exercise can really help us cultivate emotional patience, because we start to see the value in this proactive approach, because it's not reactive. It's not just, oh, I'm having this feeling and it's gone so far and I just have to somehow cope with it. You're getting in front of it, you're tuning into it, and you're trying to see if there's any call to action, something you can do that you might not have thought of before because this emotion drew your attention to it. Now, this last step is very important. Oh, and by the way, if you have that action identified, you can take that action when you're ready. So it feels good and also to make that plan, even knowing you can make a plan, writing down that list or writing that brings us also back to a calmer state and helps us think clearly and feel better and again, be at our best. So take that action or plan to take that action when you can. Now, this third step is very important because, after you do this exercise, and you can spend 5 to 10 minutes on it, we did it a little quickly. But once you do it, you'll realize, oh, okay, there's nothing more I can do right now or in the immediate future. Then it's crucial that you shift your attention to things in the present. You let go. And this is important because, of course, it helps us rejuvenate and kind of ground ourselves and take care of ourselves. But it's also important that it's the third step and not the first step. Often we kind of try to let go right away. We're like, oh, I have this emotion I want to avoid, I kind of can't cope with it right now. But if we take a little time to lean into the emotion instead and know that this third step of letting go is coming, it will give us more flexibility. And it doesn't have to come back to the present doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to sit and meditate for 5 hours or be kind of in some perfect Buddhist state of enlightenment, as wonderful as that is. You can come back to the present by doing things like exercising, chatting with a friend, having a soothing cup of tea, even just actively noticing your environment, your body, just letting go of this future tense thinking where you're in the future making plans and coming back for just a few moments to be in the moment. That is rejuvenating, even if it's for just a few minutes at a time. So this is one of the main exercises when you have a very clear sense of anxiety or distress. You kind of know what the source of it is. I just want to briefly, because I think I went a little bit over on that than I intended to. I just want to briefly say, too, sometimes we have free-floating worries. It doesn't feel like we really know what the source of that is. And that becomes maybe even trickier. You just feel a low-level yuckiness. I don't know what's going on, as I'm saying here. Here, I just want to remind people that tuning into that feeling is the best thing you can do. And even if it's painful in the beginning, it will be the best way to go through rather than around those emotions. It will be more effective. And sitting quietly, noticing your body and mind, letting feelings arise, helping your kids do the same. It's not going to fix everything, but it will cultivate a practice that allows you to have that emotional patience and more effectively work through those feelings down the line. If we don't build our distress tolerance, our tolerance for feeling these feelings, we will have more coping problems. Distress tolerance is one of the biggest challenges that we have in our mental health, not allowing ourselves to feel the feelings. These kinds of this attitude of I'm going to tune in, I'm going to lean into those feelings, physically, metaphorically, like you can even just stretch and feel your body and engage with those feelings. That can be incredibly effective. We're pausing on, worrying about our performance and our achievement and problem solving. We're hanging on loosely. Don't let go. There's some rock and roll wisdom there, if you know that song from back in the day. And here, when you're in the state of abiding and enduring those emotions just a little bit more, helping your loved ones do the same, that's when we can start to identify the call to action and do a lot of what I was just speaking about in the prior slide. So let's stop there, and I'm going to pause recording so that we have about 15 minutes for discussion.